Hello, everyone. My name is Shauna Smith, and I'm one of the organizers behind L.A.W.N, which is Lawn Art with Neighbors. And today I have the pleasure of speaking with Daniel Johnson. Daniel Johnson is an artist that participated in L.A.W.N, and you may remember his artwork because it was pretty iconic. On Monday and Tuesday, so the beginning of L.A.W.N week, we had multiple photos and videos of a performance art piece called Unanswer. And Daniel Johnson is the artist behind that performance piece. Now, on both of those videos and both of those performances, we had comments about, well, what's going on here? This is so interesting. This is so cool. What's happening? So we thought we'd speak directly to Daniel Johnson and get to hear directly from him what exactly was going on with that artwork. So Daniel, thank you so much for meeting with me today. I'm so glad to talk to you. We have a couple simple questions for you. And I don't have a big introduction to Daniel because I only recently met him, but I do know that he is a practicing artist and that he is a student at Missouri State University. And he's also a student of Deidre Argyle, who is one of the other organizers behind L.A.W.N. Daniel, is there anything else that you'd like to share about yourself?
That's pretty much the major points. I'm a sculpture student at MSU, and I'm sort of just trying to dip my toe into any sort of art things that I can do. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks for I'm so glad that L.A.W.N was one of those things that you dipped your toe into. We can go ahead and get started. I have a question here in the beginning. And one of the things I want to touch base with before we really go into Daniel's art piece is to talk about performance art in general. A lot of people know the word performance and what it means in reference to a play or music, but perhaps whenever you think about performance with art, it might get a little confusing. So it's a very in-depth, and there's a lot of history to performance art, but I'd love to hear directly from Daniel Johnson how he understands performance art, and this will just be one version of what this means. So Daniel, would you like to share with us a little bit about performance art or how it is that you think about it?
Sure. I find performance art really interesting because it's sort of an art form that, like you said, people are they know sort of some extent of it whenever it comes to theater and other forms of performance. But in the art world and in an art setting, it's so sort of it's very contemporary, very modern, and then somewhat unfamiliar. I was only recently exposed to performance art pretty much within the past 2 years with my classes at college, and it's one of those art forms that has the ability to be so avant-garde at some points that it's sometimes hard to witness. There's some most famous performances by artists like Marina Abramovic or Carolee Schneemann. They're cutting edge, or they're these feats of endurance that are somewhat hard to watch. And my opinion of performance art is so interesting because of the inclusion of the artist and the body within it. I was talking to my mom actually about performance art, and she kept asking questions like, well, are mascots in like sports teams, is that performance art, or is Broadway a form of performance art? And I would categorize it under performance, but I think what distinguishes the art of performance from the performance of actors or commercial things is the nuanced approach to communication and the concept behind it. And so I think that sort of artistic delivery is what sets performance art in our world right now.
Absolutely. That's a great description. And I love the examples that you use. You mentioned one of my very favorite artists of all time, which is Marina Abramovich.
Hmm.
And I love that you also mentioned that performance art can be hard to witness. Sometimes it's documented. In your case, it was documented. And
Hmm.
sometimes it's not even documented. So can you share what was your inspiration for doing performance with L.A.W.N? Um, I'm not going to say that it wasn't necessarily untraditional, but a lot of people did something a little bit more traditional, which really just means they made an object. They made
Hmm.
something that could withstand the full week. It could be viewed at any time, whether it would be sculptural or two-dimensional. So what was it about performance art that you wanted to go for Lawn Art with Neighbors?
Uh, thanks for asking. It's sort of there's sort of multiple reasons. One of which is because, and I think that the primary reason is because I do love the communication that happens when an artist is present within the work. At least, and I know that there's probably some performances that maybe don't feature the artist as much, and maybe are more akin to the actual like process. But I loved the ability to be within the work and use myself as a material in the same way that I would use steel in a steel sculpture or clay in ceramics. I loved being able to put myself within the work. On top of that, I do come from I did drama all in high school. I I like being in a quote unquote production, for lack of a better term, and in a performance. I like I like doing that, and it was also because of COVID-19 and everything. Artists are having to be very thrifty and resourceful with the materials that we have, and looking for materials. The one I always have on me is me, so it was easy because I was right there, and I had been waiting for a time to use performance because I love the practice so much, and this seemed like a good as time as any, especially with the discovery of the site that I loved so much.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I have another question for you, just a quick one. I'm
Sure.
wondering how often or how long have you been doing performance? Is this one of your first ones, or what's your personal practice been?
On terms of artistic performance, this was in fact my first one, um, which the result is what you'd expect from a first performance. Things might not have gone as according to plan as I had hoped in some cases, but I'm proud of the work nonetheless.
Yes, and I wouldn't have guessed it was your first performance because you kept your composure, so you kept to it so well.
Yeah.
I want to share, I forgot to do this. I was going to do it at the very beginning of our video, but I would love to share some images and video of the performance piece that we're referencing, especially for somebody who didn't even see the performance or the video so far. So this is just an image of Daniel, and this was his first performance. He did this one on Monday, and he did a secondary one on Tuesday, or an additional one on Tuesday. And we're going to have Daniel speak about both of these performances. But whenever Daniel mentioned that he had to be very thrifty with his materials, this might be a good time to take a look at one of the outfits that he wore, or wardrobes
Mhm.
that he created. Do you want to talk a little bit about this outfit or wardrobe now, Daniel, or do you want to wait for that? Or
I can speak about it now.
okay,
So there are multiple parts of this wardrobe that you can see here, and some of the pieces appear in the second performance, and some of them are reserved only for the first one. I'll start with sort of the largest part, which is the reflective material of the skirt and the rope that's holding it there. Uh, I the first I knew I wanted to sort of reference old traditional clothes of either ritual or not modern clothing. So clothing of antiquity and clothing of a time before machining and that sort of thing. But clearly, this performance has so much that is machined, and so even evident in just the plastic wrap and the jar of pickles and the everything else. So I went with my first plan was to use a large piece of cloth, which was painter's tarp. But then I found this large piece of reflective material in the dumpster, and I pulled it out, and it worked so well on me as a robe, and I decided to use that instead. I felt like using this material, using this almost unidentifiable but clearly machine made, clearly synthetic, reflective material in the same way that a traditional robe or traditional cloth or textile would have been worn, was an interesting juxtaposition of ways that we could look at form and material and assign a date to them. And so that's kind of what I was hoping to accomplish. That's why I went and used twine rope instead of something like paracord, just to reinforce the idea that there's this jumbling of where the time frame and what the context is here. As for, and the same thing sort of applies to the plastic wrap. I created the mask out of plastic wrap and clear tape, which by molding it around my face safely. And then I broke the bottom of a coffee pot, and that is the viewing port in the center, which almost serves to be symbolic of like a singular eyeball or a lens of some sort that that this creature that I'm embodying in this photo is able to gaze through. And same goes for the cord that's draped around my neck. This was one of the wardrobe, I suppose you could call it a wardrobe malfunction. It was intended to be a braided umbilical cord that emerged from my navel and then wrapped around my neck. But and if you saw the performance, you would know that there's a lot of different liquids. After one liquid got on me, the cord fell off, but I kept it draped around my neck regardless. And it's also just plastic wrap braided. This was another way of jumbling up the time frame because I'm using a machined and synthetic material in combination with a traditional technique of braiding. Mm. But I also wanted it to look symbolic of an umbilical cord, mostly because this character here is new. It's not necessarily a newborn, but definitely new to this world, and that goes along with it being the first performance. Mm. The body paint. The body paint, I wanted to, again, reference traditional ways of ritual and traditional ways of painting the body for religion and stuff, usually through more inspired by non-Western cultures. And so I found the combination of green and red to be an interesting color combination, as they are both complementary colors, but it had this almost lizard-like amphibian quality to it, the way that they blended and the way that they were painted, or even an infrared scope or an infrared sensor. This idea of like thermal resignation on my body. And that's pretty much the wardrobe for the first performance, and then the rest of the items were props.
Well, we can go ahead and we have a short video. It's maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute of the first performance. So Daniel, we can go ahead and watch that.
Great.
And then you can just tell us more about that performance, and we'll be able to see a part of your wardrobe or prop, the water vessel in this video that you can't quite see in this photo.
Sure.
All right, so that was just a very small glimpse of the performance, and I believe the full performance was pretty close to an hour for that first one. And there was a lot of different actions that happened. That video showed just one part of a repeated action, and it showed Daniel scooping up water with his hands into a vessel. And there's quite a few other actions that you can watch the videos. They are on the Facebook page. The full performance is on there. But Daniel, would you like to begin by just telling us some of the other actions that we weren't able to show just now?
Of course. The performance began. I would like to separate the performance into essentially 4 sections, which each corresponded to one ritual completed 4 times, mostly. I would begin the first part of the ritual by filling a capsule, a large white sterile capsule, with milk, and I would pour it in, and then ceremoniously take an imbibement of this fluid and let it sort of run down me. After that, I would, carrying the larger water vessel that you saw in that video around my waist, I would walk to one of the concrete stations that held one of these vessels, and I would crouch down, and as you saw in that video, I would proceed to fill it using only my hands. After it was adequately filled, I would open up the jar of pickles that you see in most of the videos. This is probably the prop that I feel like most people have the most questions about, but I would open up the jar of pickles and pulling one out, I would place it into the vessel and then march around the station, planting another, march around the station once more, and plant another until there were three pickles planted in each station. I would then close the vessel, walk back to the center station, and repeat the process for the remainder of the 4 stations that I chose.
Is there anything that you'd like? I'll just give you open floor. So you've explained the actions wonderfully. Can you just tell us, what is it that you're wanting to communicate with this performance? What are some of the concepts and the ideas behind it? Definitely feel free to touch on the symbolic nature of the pickles and the water and the actions, the ritual itself.
Of course. I wanted, with this performance was sort of an example of this creature, this entity that's performing the ritual. It was an example of this entity's newness and sort of genesis into the world. I wanted to, in contrast with the second performance, I wanted there to be a lot of movement, of travel, of moving from one station to another and completing a ritual at this station and then moving back to the center. It's this sort of idea of cultivation, of transferal from one vessel to another, that's evident in not only putting water into my side pouch and traveling and taking that to another vessel and taking the water out of the side pouch and putting it into this vessel, but it was also evident in taking the pickles, which I found to be this very interesting image of preservation and chemical and these units, these entities of organic material preserved in a capsule, of taking them out of that environment and placing them into a new one, mirrored with the idea of pilgrimage, of taking that trek from the center to the outer limits of the site. I wanted there to be a sense of exploration, a sense of pilgrimage, that this creature is bound to walk to these extents of the site and leave a part of himself there, which is sort of what the pickles were resemblant of, but also the water.
I love hearing hearing more about the pickles and how it relates to preservation and chemicals. And wait, anything else that you'd like to share about the first performance?
I think that I'm very happy that I did it, and I would like for people to, when they go and view the site, I would like for people to see it as bigger than itself, in a way. When I would look at the site, which I'll talk about the site later because I did some research on it, but when I looked at the site, there's the center portion, and then there's the 12 outer concrete pads, and definitely people can look at it and see evidence of sort of this references to Stonehenge or other ritualistic locations. But due to the nature of there being 12, it almost looks like a clock in some ways. I saw it much like a compass rose, and that sort of went into my decision to plant 4 stations. And hopefully in me doing so, I've communicated that the pilgrimage from one section to another station is far greater than the 7 feet that or the 10 or so feet difference that is actually, but that the movement of this entity from one station to another could very well have been miles or light years.
Absolutely. Anything else about the first performance?
I think that wraps it up.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. It's not incredibly often that we get to hear such in-depth information from the artist, so it's very lovely that you shared that with us. I'm going to go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, of course.
I'm going to go ahead and show another video, and this will be of the second performance that Daniel did. This was done at 7 p.m. on Tuesday evening. It's at the same site, but it does seem to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, it does seem to be a different performance, like separate from the first one. I'd love to hear if they were tied together at all, but we'll start with this video, and then again, we'll give Daniel the open floor to just discuss anything that they like about the artwork. So here is the video of the second performance. And so again, that was just a small action that happened. Oh, I think I still hear a small action that happened during the performance. The full performance was pretty close to about 40 minutes. Daniel, would you like to start by sharing any other actions that happened during that performance?
Sure. This performance, the second one, in contrast to the first, was less of a repeated, or well, less movement and more one thing, one solid action repeated over and over again. I would begin by I would display the brick that I had in the air, and then I'd set it down, and then I would display one VHS into the air, pointing it upwards to the sky, and then laying it down on the ground, and then proceeding to smash it with the brick. After it was smashed, I would sift through it and try to find the film within. And unrolling it, I would begin to bind it around myself. This kept going until my entire reserves of VHSs were destroyed.
And do you want to talk a little bit about the wardrobe that you built for this performance?
Sure. As you can see from the video, the wardrobe was mostly had a lot of similar things. The skirt, the reflective skirt and ropes were still there, but some things were missing. The water vessel, as well as the umbilical cord and the body paint, were gone. Through that, I wanted to communicate that the creature that people saw in the first performance, who was this idea of newness and being a visitor, in a sense, a new visitor. Some time had passed between the first performer and the second performer. His skin had become, the umbilical cord was gone. His skin had become more acclimated to the environment that we know. But it was also this idea of becoming less costumed as a conjunction to being more vulnerable. I no longer have this paint on me covering up my body. And even if I take myself out of this narrative that I've constructed and I just think about Daniel in the performance, I was way more comfortable having this paint on me because that served as almost a garment in and of itself. Whereas with no paint, I felt strikingly more vulnerable. That being said, the large headpiece is probably the most prominent part of that costume. This stark white, geometric, almost a sphere shape with antlers for lack of a better word, antlers or spires coming out the top. These are, I think people will look at this and people have told me that, oh, he's wearing a virus on his head. And I am aware of that visual communication. And I don't necessarily have a problem with it. It's not necessarily what I was, or it didn't really have anything to do with COVID-19. It mostly had to do with this idea of blinding myself. I could not see at all in this helmet. And you can tell that by the way I stretch and reach for the VHSs, even though they're in front of me, trying to find them. I can't see the film. I'm pulling the film out whenever I can only feel it with my hands. And it was also this idea of being blinded not only realistically, but creating a form around my head that served as a facsimile of a head. The spherical shape kind of became a head in and of itself, and these almost nails had been driven into this shape, like spikes of anger or emotion or something. I think that was conveyed hopefully through the geometric nature of it. It was very spiky and very angular.
Wonderful. So you've painted a good description of the actions that happen and you've explained the wardrobe itself. Would you like to go ahead and begin to talk about, or really it's more of in addition to talk about the performance, the concepts, what it was that you're trying to communicate? What was the full kind of well-rounded aspect of this performance?
Sure. The idea in the second performance was that this, after establishing the world, after establishing the distance in the first performance, after taking the necessary steps to plant parts of himself across all of the compass directions, and give a sort of an offering of life in the form of pickles at each station, which I should mention that those vessels in the first performance were still there and present for the second performance. After sort of giving this offering, this creature comes and gives another sacrifice, this time in the form of memory. And it's this concept of when we look at a VHS, we know it's a symbol of documentation. It's a sort of symbol of data storage, an antique one, sure, but one of documentation and memory. And the idea of destroying the vessel that's housing it and taking out the raw memory in the form of film and using it again in this traditional method of binding myself. It was sort of this concept of dealing with memory and dealing with the past in a way. Hopefully, I communicated that in the second performance, this creature has come back and, in a sense, is working on himself, trying to wrestle with these memory storage devices.
I was so glad to hear you talk about memory, because that was one of the really strong interpretations I had from your performance with the use of the VHSs. And they had the sticker on the side that almost like home videotapes would always have too, that would say what it is that was recorded on that video.
They were actually each one, the stickers were pointed outwards for that purpose. And they each had about four movies on them that somebody else had downloaded. I found these were found objects. Somebody else had downloaded movies onto these VHSs and then thrown them away, and I pulled them out of the trash. And I wanted to point those outwards to show the handwritten messages of what was actually contained in these vessels. And I almost found it interesting because that image of a rectangle, of sort of a thick rectangle, in contrast to other forms of documentation, it was like a facsimile of a book in a way. We store them on the shelf in the same way we store a book, and I put the spines outward in a way, but they were still vessels for memory that I had to crack open and pull out the actual data. So,
and then you wrapped it around your body.
Mm-hmm.
So would you like to speak about the site a little bit as well?
Sure. I mentioned earlier that what it sort of looked like. It's a large concrete circular station in the center with radiating outwards 12 smaller concrete pads, all in a clockwork fashion. When I saw them, I personally saw it and saw Ritual, Stonehenge, all of those wonderful things. They are some of it is obscured by tree, and some of it is more exposed to the sidewalk and the street. And that was something I enjoyed, that the nature nearby was sort of overtaking the site, and it was almost becoming lost. I was asking around to see if I could figure out anything about the site, and people who lived nearby could pretty much just tell me that they didn't know who owned it. I did some research, however, and I think that the two guesses that people had were it was either for an electric pylon or for a water tower. Pretty much after 5 minutes of research, I found it was in fact a water tower. It was and this comes from a this is information from a Springfield forum that I found, but it was a water tower that was built in the late 20s, I believe, and then had to be taken down pretty recently in the 90s because of lead paint, and it was lead painted, and so it was having to be taken down. I also read that the grass nearby, and maybe this is probably closer to during the 90s, but the grass nearby was, because of the lead paint, was also somewhat toxic. And the idea of completing a ritual on toxic ground became interesting to me.
And what is the address to your lawn site where the performance has happened?
The address is 221 South Jefferson. It's right off of Grand, and you driving down Grand, you'll see it. That's I don't have much of a better. There's not like a set address for it, so that's there. But
yes, and if people wanted to go visit it from now until Sunday when L.A.W.N ends, will they find anything there at the site now?
Yes, people will hopefully still find, as long as no animals have run off with anything. But people will still find the vessels with the pickles inside of them and the water. Probably more now that it's rained, and people will still find those. And I will be putting out a container with the fragments of the memory storage VHSs that I shattered, a container with those all in them, and a way to go see the videos.
Wonderful. And just a reminder out there for anybody who's watching, there is footage of both of the performances, the full documentation on the Facebook pages. And if you wanted to comment on this video with any additional questions or responses to Daniel, I will happily make sure that Daniel gets those questions and those responses. Daniel, is there anything else that you want to share with us today? Anything at all?
I mostly just want to say thank you to L.A.W.N specifically, to everybody on the L.A.W.N team, to Lawn Art with Neighbors, but also to everybody who came out and watched and stayed for the whole performance, and watched an artist play with pickles, pretty much. Thank you to people who helped me, and thank you to anybody who goes and watches the videos online, even if you couldn't make it out to the actual performance. Thanks to everybody, pretty much.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much for participating and spending your time talking with us today to answer some of these questions. I'm really excited to see what you do next. I'm really excited to see if performance continues to be a part of your practice. And I want to commend you for doing something so brave. I want to commend you for being able to communicate clearly about your artwork. It's something definitely to be proud of. So thank you again for participating in L.A.W.N.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, everyone, that's it for today. And we will see you soon. You have just a few more days to see L.A.W.N. You have until this Sunday, Mother's Day, May 10th. And then most of the pieces will be taken down, but some might stay up, which is exciting to think about. Thank you very much.